So the Transparency Task Force, as you all realise, I'm sure, is an international community that is dedicated to trying to reform the financial services sector so that it serves society better. We have an increasingly focused vision about building a large international influential institution that helps to ensure that the consumer is treated fairly by the financial services sector. We have roughly 2,700 people now who receive the Transparency Times. We've got about 300 ambassadors. We're growing, despite the fact that we're very constrained as far as resources is concerned, but we're making pretty good use of what we have. That, I think, is pretty much all I need to say in terms of the Transparency Task Force. In terms of this particular event, be aware that we are about to start work on two very important consultations. There is an FCA consultation, the deadline for which is December the 15th, and that consultation is all about the consumer investment market. So this event is very much aligned to that topic. Please step forward and volunteer to be part of the response squad for that consultation. Because if you've got views, the consultations are the great ways to get those views across. And TTF is becoming pretty adept, I would say, at putting together pretty decent responses to consultations. So that's one point. The second point is, before then, deadline November the 27th, there's a consultation about economic crime, which will be of interest to anybody that's into the topic of scams generally. We want to make sure we respond to that one as well, and to ensure that we're doing all we can to raise awareness of the issues that really do need sorting out. And there is a great deal that needs sorting out. Okay, please use the chat very freely. Please don't hesitate to put your contact details into it. Hopefully you'll make some new connections today. We're now going to go to introductions. I do need everybody to be really brief, so just name, organisation, and that's pretty much it. We're going to go in the following order. The first batch of people are going to be Jill Cardy, then Peter O'Donnell, then Steve Conley, then Andrew Candy. So Jill, to you first of all, please. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, Jill Red Kite's Money. X everything. X everything and current nothing.
Thank you, Jill. To Peter O'Donnell.
Hi, Peter O'Donnell, Director and Founder of New South Law. I find investment fraud wherever I can, and I specialise in how insolvency is used to hide the perpetrator's misfeasance.
Thank you very much, Peter. And everyone, please do share where you are as well. So, Peter, you're in South Coast somewhere, isn't it?
No, I work from next to Silverstone Racetrack. All our offices are in the South Coast in Littlehampton. That's
it, Littlehampton. I remember there was a Littlehampton connection there. And Jill, let everybody know where you are as well, please. Thank you.
France.
Okay, lovely. And now to Mr. Steve Conley. Hi, Steve. Lovely to see you as always, sir.
Hi, Andy. So Steve Conley, I think, the 10th ambassador for the Transparency Task Force, founder of the Market Integrity Team. I run a business called the Academy of Life Planning, which is the movement for non-intermediating financial planners. Also, I'm the chief executive of two companies that are involved in scams, the Fraud Team and Asset Recovery Network UK, which helps foreign banks that have their money stolen and stashed in the UK. So there's a lot of different hats I wear, but I'm in Lincolnshire in Spilsby, which is not far from Skegness.
Thank you very much, Steve. Lovely. Mr. Andrew Candy, nice to see you again, sir. Please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Andrew Candy, director of a limited company, graphic designer and art gallery, affected by interest rate swap scandal ongoing, and obviously the regulators' involvement in that, including the Financial Ombudsman based in London.
Thank you, Andrew. Andrew is an absolute treasure chest of information and knowledge about he really is. So Andrew's a good example of somebody who's basically got nothing to do with the financial sector other than the fact that he's become a scam victim of it. Thank you, Andrew, for being here. We now go to Sarah, then we'll go to Sunil, then Francisca, then Sue Flood, then Sue Lewis. Sarah, please say hi. Thank you.
There we go. Oh, no, that's sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah, my name is Sarah Stokes. I'm based in Sheffield, South Yorkshire. I am the director for an advisory firm, and also as well I specialise in helping people recover monies from being victims of pension mis-selling.
Thank you very much indeed, Sarah. Great stuff. So Sunil, please introduce yourself as well, please.
Thank you, Andy. Good evening, all. Sunil Muralidhar Shastri, Director, Ocean Governance Limited, based in Hull. Somebody has to live in Hull. I'm basically a consultant, expert, and speaker in ocean and environmental governance. My interest in TTF is through environmental and social governance. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunil. We'll go to Francisca. Nice and short and sweet, please, Francisca. Tell everybody a bit about you and where you are as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm based in Vienna, Austria, and I am a victim of pension mis-selling.
Thank you, Francisca. That was beautifully succinct. Sue Flood, lovely to see you, Sue. Please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Sue Flood, Transparency Task Force Advisory Board, victim of 10-year pension scam, and an ambassador for the TTF.
Thank you, Sue Flood. We go from Sue Flood to Sue Lewis. Hi, Sue.
Hi, good evening, everybody. So I'm an independent board director and consultant, self-employed, anything legal considered, former chair of the Financial Services Consumer Panel, and I'm in Brentford, not Antigua, where I would rather be.
Of course. Thank you very much, Sue. Mr. Philip Meadowcroft, who's been rather busy with Aviva recently. Philip.
Yes, good evening all. Thank you very much. I am chairman of our family small self-administered scheme, our SAS. I'm the administrative trustee for it. I'm also, for my sins, a shareholder activist, but I really concentrate on companies like Aviva and Lloyds Bank and their conduct and governance issues.
Thank you, Philip. Wonderful. Jean. Hi, Jean. Lovely to see you with that beautiful, wonderful accent. Please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hi. Am I on mute?
No, you're good to go.
Can you hear me? Yeah, just basically a victim of pension scam, so supporting the TTF, and that's it.
Thank you very much, Jean, for being with us. Helen Scott, lovely to see you. And I do like your fridge, Helen, but tell us a bit more about you. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you've seen a bit of my fridge recently, Andy. Yeah, Helen Scott, I'm in Leeds, in Yorkshire. I'm the founder and chief executive of a company called Eris FX, and we're an FCA authorised payments firm.
Thank you very much, Helen. Great stuff. We now go to Shan Turnbull, who's managed to be with us twice tonight. So he's on my screen in 2 places. Impressive stuff, Shan. Please tell everybody briefly about yourself and, most interestingly, where you are, sir.
I'm in Sydney, Australia, at a bit after 5 a.m. in the morning, and I'm on my iPhone and on my iPad, trying to keep quiet in a house of sleeping people. And I'm author of Democratizing the Wealth of Nations, and spent my life trying to reform the theories and practice of capitalism with little success. Thank you.
Thank you, Shan. Good to have you with us once again, sir. Mr. Adrian Tupper, how are you? And please introduce yourself.
Hello, Andy, everybody. Yes, introduce myself. I worked as a financial professional for about 30 years. James Capel, HSBC, Euromoney, on indices and products, passive tracking products type of things. So I kind of know the industry from the inside more than anything. But for the last 2 years, I have totally changed profession. I am now a counsellor.
Thank you very much, Adrian. And then we get to Paul. Paul, please say hello.
Hi, everybody. I'm Paul Resnick. I've designated myself the CEO of the Suitable Advice Institute in Melbourne, Australia. In my latter life, I'm just a shit stirrer.
And Paul does that really, really well. If you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to Paul's Twitter feed. It's great. Paul, whack your Twitter handle into the chat if you don't mind. I think a lot of people find it very, very, very useful. He's extremely good at asking rather poignant questions. Thanks, Paul, for being with us. And I know it's very early for you as well. We'll try to keep you awake, sir. And last but by no means least, we go to Mike. And I'm not sure what Mike's surname is. I've got no idea who Mike is right now. Mike, please introduce yourself. Thank you. It looks like Mike might be on the stuck on mute. Okay, we'll come back to Mike in due course. Mike, when you can introduce yourself, please do pop a note into the chat. All right. Now, this is the first time we've ever done an event like this. And what I mean by like this is we've basically given the opportunity to two stalwarts of the financial planning sector to speak from the heart, to tell it as they see it. I very much doubt if I'm going to agree with everything that Garry and Stephen say. I very much doubt that any of you are going to agree with absolutely everything that they say. In fact, in so many ways, whether you agree with what they say or not is actually kind of irrelevant. The real value we have here is two gentlemen who are going to be telling it as they see it. And by doing so in a very unconstrained way, the kind of way that no other organization would dare do, we create the opportunity for real grown-up discussion about the realities of where we are in terms of financial regulation. I am absolutely convinced that there are some fundamental flaws in the regulatory framework that really do need fixing. And a phrase we use quite a bit within the Transparency Task Force is the idea that progress begins with realism. So when Garry and Steve basically mentioned the idea of having a special kind of event where they would have the chance just to really describe very honestly and very candidly and frankly rather bluntly what they see, I thought there's value in that. Let's do that. It might be a bit risky. It might be a bit controversial, but let's let it happen. We're all grown-ups. We'll handle things. The only kind of rule we've really got is we're all old enough and experienced enough to know that criticism just for the sake of it has really little value. You know, just talking about things being bad really doesn't have much value at all. But describing the failures and the flaws and the imperfections is extremely valuable if it's the first step in a process of getting people to think about, okay, what could be a better way? What could be a more meaningful way of trying to do what the regulatory framework is doing? So with that in mind, I think we can all look forward to a very, very open, honest conversation. Depending on how Garry and Stephen feel, they may well be happy to take questions along the way. If you want to ask a question, I think they're happy with that. Please do just raise your hand. I'll kind of manage that bit and facilitate it so we don't end up with people accidentally talking over each other. And I think that way we're going to have a pretty lively discussion. I'd really like to thank Garry and Stephen for being brave enough, forthright enough, and willing to share things exactly as they see it. That's the brief we've kind of agreed for tonight. So I hope everybody really enjoys it. Most importantly, we need to turn the energy, the momentum, the ideas, the impetus created this evening into some action. And I honestly think it's vital that we do a decent job of feeding into the consultations. And the very next event we have that relates to this kind of topic is the event we have on December the 15th, same time as this event. And that event is titled, Are the UK's Financial Regulators Failing? And again, it's a brave topic. It's a kind of topic that most organisations would stay well away from, but we're not going to get anywhere if we continue to kind of kick the can down the road. We need some very, very honest conversations. So with that all in mind, I'm going to now invite Garry and Stephen to take it from here. Thank you, gents, very much indeed for taking the opportunity to share your thoughts with this evening. Really looking forward to hearing what you have to say, and more importantly, the interaction we have with the other guests that we have tonight. Garry and Stephen, over to you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Steve will unmute in a minute, no doubt. The idea that this came out of really was we'd seen quite a few TTF meetings and been involved in them, and one or two sort of struck us as a little bit sort of mum and apple pie, that there was imagining a world that actually I don't think one would ever see, and wouldn't it be great if it was like this? Well, yes, it would be, but that isn't necessarily the world we're living in. And even if we could get have that world, how do we get from where we are to that world? So you could decide to destroy everything that exists at the moment and start again, and that might work. Conversely, you may decide to actually improve what's going on. So Steve has got we've got a slideshow here. So I'm going to go and share my screen. I'm sharing the screen that looks like that one.
Are you sharing and me sharing? Oh, you're sharing. All right.
Well, I'll do it. Then you can do the talking.
All right. Okay.
How about that?
Yeah, whoever's speaking is going to be on the screen, which is cool. And gents, could you just perhaps give us a bit of background? Talk about yourselves first of all. I want everybody to understand where you're coming from as experienced frontline people. So please do start off with that. Thanks a lot, Stephen. Off you go. Thank you.
Can we go first?
You always go first? Right. I got involved in the very early stages of regulation. I mean, in 1986, I had my own IFA practice, and I saw what was coming down the road at us, and some of it was good and some of it wasn't. Regulation, by the nature of the beast, is always heavily impacts small companies. That is just, you know, fact. And at the time, God, were we innocent in comparison to where we are now? We were quite worried about what was being offered then. I have to say, if we were offered it now, we'd be extremely happy. But that ain't the case. So I have been in and out of representing IFAs from certainly 1988, and I actually did it professionally in 1989. I did 10 years to the day, to 99, went off and did other things, and I've been back for the last 4 or 5 years. I organised a thing called the Heath report, which looks at the availability of advice to consumers, and where that advice comes from. It also looks at how the advisors run their companies, and what are the financial bits that they need to get involved in. So that's what I do. I have found myself, much to my annoyance, as being the John the Baptist of the industry, and have been for the best part of 30 years. I seem to always be saying, well, this is about to happen. Everyone tells me that it's not, and then it does. And similarly, I'm perennially on a Groundhog Day, that things that happen that I'm being told are new and exciting and different are actually exactly the same things we saw in the 80s, 90s and the noughties. So again, we do have, I do see that. I run the Impartial Financial Advisors Association now. We used to call ourselves Libertatum, but nobody could spell it and half the people could pronounce it, so we changed the name. And that's how we run now. We have 500 advisor companies across the UK, and well over 1,500 advisors within those companies. We tend to have the smaller company involved. The larger ones either don't, aren't represented, or if they are, by other bodies. So anyway, that's where we are. Steve's going to do, basically Steve's report is here, so what I'm going to do is flick him up his first slide, and he can then tell you about himself.
How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Stephen Farrall. I run a business based in East Anglia. Can you hear me all right? Good. I've been in financial services the mid-80s, just about the same time as Garry. In fact, I was a local director of his first trade association in the 80s and 90s. This business was founded in 1995. Well, I did my first training with Legal & General, and I then joined an outfit that was run by a drunken liar, but you live and learn, you know. So we left there and founded this outfit in 95. We've been fee charging since the outset, so we're not product sales based from day one. We've got 2 partners, 3.5 advisors, 6 support staff, actually 5, one resigned on Monday. We've got 350 to 400 active clients. We've got 50 million under our advice. Our revenue is about £500,000 a year. It won't be this year. Our average advisor size is about 60 to 120 clients. I have more because I've been going a long time. Next slide. Our job, this is our proposition, or we think Our job is to help our clients preserve and grow the value of their wealth. If we can serve you profitably, we'd love to welcome you as a client. In other words, we have not specialised in high net worth. We haven't gone down the financial planning route. We are determined to serve the long tail of people who aren't so well off. We developed propositions to do that and processes to do that properly. So we've got a good, all-encompassing, proper financial services business which services anybody that we can do profitably. And some we can't. I've got a case going right now. It's been going on since February. Some people don't even have a phone, let alone anything else. They're not even plugged into the 20th century. So we're still working for them, but we do all that. So what we actually do, this is basic financial planning, really. We ask clients, where the hell are you? Where do you want to go? How the hell are you going to get there? What are the threats to that? And then we keep you on track. It's very simple, basic financial planning proposition. And that's for a longer term client for things which are what we call transactional. You want to do an extra release scheme, it's just a one-off hit or buy some insurance. Okay, clear about that? Next slide. What we can actually do is there's only a few things advisors can do. We can protect you with life insurance, getting dead, critical illness, getting not very dead, very ill. We can invest for you, if you like, investments, pensions, ISAs, that sort of stuff. We can get you into debt, help you get mortgages, extra release. We can do financial planning, bring that together, and we can stop you doing daft things. Before we move on, one thing I should say about getting you into debt, extra release, in my view, if ever there's a product that was born from catastrophic government and bureaucratic failure, it's extra release. There you go. That's just opinion. Next slide, please, Gary. So let's assume all the insurance and debt is sorted. Let's assume we've done all the insurance bit, we've got your debt sorted out, and we're going ahead. So we really here, scams that we deal with, the losses that Andy talks about, are things that's to do with pensions, investments basically, which is pensions, investments, ISAs, bonds, interest rate swaps, whatever it happen to be. So as our IC is to help preserve value, and we try and do that with our investments, we try to make a return, preserve it, and make a little bit on the top of that value. So we won't say to you, you're going to get 15% of your money, Mrs. Jones. That's not going to happen. What we'll give you is an expected return, which is realistic, and hopefully make a bit of profit on top of that as well. How we do it is astonishingly easy if you know what you're doing. It's not rocket science. It really isn't. If you've got a good process, you understand the fundamentals of the economics involved, and you understand the fundamentals of some of the where returns come from, it is straightforward. So what are the threats to that successful investment experience? Next slide, Gary. What we do is a negative process. We're pretty sure if we cock it up, if we try and be clever, that's the thing we don't want to do. If you think you're going to get clever, you're going to screw it up. That's almost invariably what's happened in the past. We use evidence-based funds with low OCRs. We've got 6 portfolios, core gold holding if you want it. We use ESG funds as well. And we use markets for what they're there for, to provide returns. And the threats to that are, Gary, are 3. Government and bureaucratic failure, scammers and other crimes, advisory incompetence and error. Not markets. Markets are where you get the return. That's precisely what they're there for, to deliver a return to investors. That's what they're there for. That's why they exist. They want to take your money at a fair price, give you a return, and invest it to make more wealth. Next slide. So what are the government failures? Right, layer upon layer of failed interventions. Take the pensions for a start. The actual first one of these was the 86 mandating pension transfers. Look what that ended up to us. That was a government intervention to mandate pension transfers on final salary schemes. And where are we now? A total intervention in the sanctity of private contract. Complete failure. Money, total failure. The value of sterling is now 2% of what it was in 1945. Most of that loss came from 1971. So it catastrophic failure in the value of money. Absolutely, central plan money has failed. Boom bust, it's not the case animal spirits, that's just claptrap. It's the unwarranted expansion of money and credit at the wrong price. You expand money and credit, you get a boom. You have to unwind it, you get a bust. It's standard stuff. Taxation. Confiscatory taxation, which is massively over complex. 45% of my gross revenue goes out as taxation. Now, I don't pay that. That's incident upon my clients. Therefore, my price is twice what it should be. The evasion responsibility. Quangos are human shields. The FCA is a way of the politicians and others not getting to take the responsibility. They just hand it over to a unaccountable racket and they can just pass it off to them. It's just, you know, just evasion responsibility. Destruction of law, or the rule of law. Well, that's the FOS, FSCS. Property rights I talked about before with things like pensions and sanctity of private contracts, you can see. The regulators and the government that we see have got universal economic cluelessness. I mean, Johnson's idea you can spend money to build things like HS2 and create wealth is just delusional. And then ill through policies like pension freedoms. It's a good idea, but Garry will tell you how it was so woefully executed and on the fly as well. Next slide. The Financial Catastrophe Authority, just to talk about the actual problems with the actual regulation. Their rule book stands, if you print it out, 8.5 feet high. It's ludicrous. Nobody knows what's in it, least of all the bureaucrats. They use it as a financial trap. We've abandoned it. We just tick the boxes and carry on. All we do is operate to the 10 commandments. That's what we do. You can't do anything else. It's impossible. And I've said this to them and they know it. There's no legal democratic financial accountability. I've got no skin in the game, which means they're entirely self-serving. They have no accountability. That makes them absolutely self-serving because incentives matter. They're incompetent and economically witless. Couldn't see a real problem if you put it under the nose. Look at Connaught, which Garry will elucidate later. You can just see it. I mean, I've seen it. I've had cases in the past where I thought I could report this to the regulator. Oh, no, forget it. I'll go to the police. Cost. Research now shows that the industry spends about 20% of its revenue on regulationism, and we don't pay that. The clients pay that. It may be legally liable for it, but it's incident upon our clients, not us. And it also creates colossal moral hazard by promising people things that it cannot deliver and societies cannot deliver. Just can't do it. Next slide, Garry. That's obviously shambles. Doesn't do the rule of law. I mean, it used on, treating customers fairly. What is fair? I've asked them, can you define fair? They then said, we don't answer questions. Like, you know, you were a, I don't know, some court somewhere in the old Eastern Bloc. They lie. I have evidence in my files of lies, of lying. They're just not telling the truth. They're incentivized to favour the client. Why? Why? Why about equity? You know, the majority of financial advisors like me are honest blokes. There we are. But why are we not getting a fair trial at this thing? Again, it's got no legal, democratic or financial accountability. Obviously it hasn't. Its arbitrary actions make professional indemnity insurance ruinously expensive because the insurers cannot work out what their risk is. So they're having to guess a premium for a future which they don't know. There is no long stop for financial advisors. Well, that's straight out of, that's not on in common law. We all have got, actually I'm an engineer by previous training, and I could have designed a dam and have 30 years reliability for it. Why have I got an indefinite liability for selling somebody an ISA? It's bonkers. It's a non-lawful process. It's a process, so it's not a law. Therefore, the claims management companies can use it to create vexatious claims. I've got one of my files just now, which has come in, which is absolutely vexatious. It's complete nonsense, but I'm going to spend hours having to deal with it. It's ridiculous. I should say I measured my time cost in October for dealing with compliance, as it's called, and I spent £3,000 of my time on compliance matters in October alone. Next slide, Garry. Right, how it destroys wealth. It adds layers of inefficiency and it adds costs, we've said. If you look at the way the taxation system works, Tax Freedom Day comes in sort of late May, early June. It's about 45% for me because I'm a high rate taxpayer. Cost of Government Day is later. Regulatory impress and deadweight costs are between 60 and 20% of revenue. That's 18%. So for every pound I charge a client, the government gets 63p, I get 37p to pay everybody else in my business. Do the whole thing. We're not the cost problem. Next, sorry. So how do you fix this racket? And it is a racket. You keep a massively, in my view, you have a massively reformed financial ombudsman scheme. You probably wouldn't do it as the way it's done now because it has no accountability. And if you did that properly, you'd scrap the FCA. It's just a failure. It will always fail. 80-20 rule, 80% of what it does is completely pointless and destructive. It serves no purpose whatsoever. Or the remaining 20%, well, it's the 80% it does is its own, justify its own position. 16% can go to self-regulation, 4% go to the police, and you're done. And you save several £billion instantly. Next slide, Gary. Gary, thank you. But underneath this all lies a much bigger and more fundamental problem. Now, we hope to be joined in this presentation by a guy called John Tomlinson, who did a study many years ago on and wrote a very good book on bad money. And underneath all this, it lies bad money and bad banking. That is the core of the problems we've got now. If you think about it, there's only two reasons to invest. One, you want income now. Two, you want income in the future. When you live in a system of financial repression, where interest rates on cash are negative effectively, how does the small saver benefit from this? What are they going to do? And the reason we're in that position is that banking is a racket. It's actually based upon Marxism. If you read the number 5 of the Marxist agenda, number 5 is centralisation of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank, the state capital, and exclusive monopoly. In other words, all the banks in the UK, Lloyds, TSB, whatever, are subsidiaries of the Bank of England. It's a nationalised system. And my definition is on the screen there, that it's a proto-nationalised, state-sanctioned, specially privileged, cartelised supplier of monopoly product engaged in counterfeiting. It's a racket. Money's a racket. Absolute racket. And that's why this is such a problem. Without sound money, we can't do our job. We just can't do it. And the Bank of England is out of control again. It has a classic technocratic failure. It is the same as the FCA. It has no accountability. That's not acceptable in a free society. It isn't. And we've got this problem of zero value in money. It's untrustworthy. Next slide. You missed one, Gary. That's it. So how do you fix these? How do you fix banking? Well, you scrap the Bank of England for a start. Shut that down. It's going to fail. If you reform commercial banks on the line as proposed by Douglas Carswell, you remove the ability for commercial banks to create credit on demand deposits, which is important. It's okay if they tell you they're creating credit on fractional reserve banking. This is on term deposits where you can agree a level of risk. But on the moment when you put your money in the bank, it becomes the bank's money. No one seems to know that, but it does. It's from the 1830s, 1840s Bank Charter Acts, and the previous case in 17 something. I can't remember what it was now exactly. So if you scrap that and you then put in place proper banking rules, you don't need a central bank. That can be proved again by the failure of the Air Bank in Scotland in the 1700s, which was no central bank. The Air Bank failed, the rest of the banking system sorted it all out, and the Air Bank partners paid off all their debts within about 60 years. So you don't need a central bank. Scrap the legal tender laws. The legal tender laws are designed to keep monopoly of money in the hands of governments and politicians. Well, the best quote from that is the one from the Bible, which says, "Put not your trust in princes." You cannot trust. You don't trust the Tories. I don't trust socialists. I don't trust the Tories. I don't trust politicians. So you're going to have no trustworthy governments. So how can you trust the illegal tender laws? You can't do it. So let money work. Let people work. Let market work out its own best money. My bet is, if you did that, you'd end up with some sort of gold or metallic-based standard. You probably wouldn't use Bitcoin or similar cryptocurrencies because people like cash. What you should do every so often is pay for petrol in your car by paying cash. That'll tell you how much frightening it is when you spend 80 quid out your back pocket on a tank full of juice. That'll tell you. So the other thing, and what you mustn't have is you mustn't compromise Gresham's law by making the government have a fixed price between the free money and its own money. So you can still collect taxes, this is from MTers, by just pricing its own money in gold as well. And you've got to then reform taxation by moving it from production, labour and capital being saved labour really, to rents. The bank asset tax, LVT, things like that, which then go a long way to stopping them compromising the other side of it all. If you do all that, off we go to the races. Wealth, jobs, happiness, whoopee. Next slide, Gary. Any questions?
Shall I wave goodbye to the slideshow?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Right,
lovely.
Now I can see everybody else.
Great. So we'll pause there and we'll check in with feedback and comments and thoughts from the audience. I can see Shan Turnbull's already put a couple of ideas into the chat. and also Adrian Tupper. And then what we'll do is we'll have a bit of a Q&A now, and then we'll pass over to Garry to add in his thoughts as well. So I'm going to move to gallery view so I can see everybody. Please just wave an arm or a hand if you want to say something at this point. Mr. Peter O'Donnell is waving at me. So Peter, please do take yourself off mute as you have and respond to what you've heard thus far. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. You overlooked the slide FSCS.
Yeah, I did. Sorry. The FSCS, I forgot that one. I'll read it out to you. Beg your pardon. The FSCS is it's a third leg of the regulatory regime. It's another racket. It lives on the fallacy that somebody else will pay. There is no such thing. It's a classic concentration of benefits and distribution of costs. It just doesn't work, and it ends up compromising everything. You know, you end up with, again, acceleration in the need for higher amounts of higher premiums on professional indemnity insurance. The claims are, the problem is that the currently advised only number 6 million people, but the claims come from the previous body of 20 million, because about 14 million were abandoned by the RDR, which destroyed a lot of businesses and jobs in retail advice like me. So you've got a problem with that, with a disconnect between who's going to pay for these claims, because don't forget, I don't pay, the clients pay. And also the FSCS really acts as free capital to banks. It doesn't help the client at all. If you think about it, it's banking free, it's free capital for banks. They can forget about trying to reserve to deal with problems like that. So it just makes them take more risk. So it's out of control. Also, it can levy on me a cost at 30 days notice. Last year I received a bill, £3,500 with 30 days to pay. I mean, you know, I didn't know it's coming, just arrives. What do you do?
Thank you, Steve, and thanks.
Sorry, thank you for reminding me. I beg your pardon.
Thanks for your observation, Peter. Did you want to make a point beyond that, or was that it?
Me?
Yeah.
I agree with Stephen. The problem is we've got a setup which encourages IFAs to con people out of their pensions and equity release from their mortgages, because if they go broke, they know that someone else will pick up the tab, and the tab is the rest of the industry. So that encourages IFAs to lie, and because they are not held personally responsible, an IFA requires no professional indemnity insurance. The company does, and only the company is held accountable, which enables an IFA or directors of a FCA regulated company to take advantage of people, get their money out of selling scams, then put their companies into insolvency. And once they put the company into insolvency, the FCA has no overview or interest in that company. That then becomes the responsibility of the insolvency practitioner, and the insolvency practitioners report on these matters to the Secretary of State for Business. What's the Secretary of State for Business got to do with financial mis-selling? It is a complete cock-up.
Can we both answer that, Garry?
Yeah.
That's actually regulatory failure, because those companies have to be authorised to trade. So the regulation gives them a sort of false flag, if you like. They look like they're decent chaps, and there are people in the industry who have serially done that. And I agree with you. Before this became as bad as it was, both Garry and I have got outfits shut down. I got an outfit or two shut down in my town, with working with other advisors and with the insurers who we thought were compromising what we did. So, but when you get an overarching regulatory system, it gives this moral hazard to clients. Oh, he's regulated, great, we'll go there then. So it encourages the crooks to enter the industry by the regulatory system. It's not the advisor's failure, it's regulatory failure again.
No, I agree. It encourages bad behaviour, because you get to get out of jail card free. Because if you aren't personally liable, the company's reliable. But if you try and get involved in financial services as a non-regulated person, you can go to jail under FSMA 2000 Section 21.
Exactly right. So in other words, scrap the regulations. An honest man can get involved in it. You know, it's very true that Milton Friedman said that licensure, official licensure, is a corrupting thing, a corrupting influence, and that's absolutely true. I came in really, we didn't need the licensing that we did now, and I came in on the back of looking around for business opportunity and realised there was something you could do and build a business. And I started out by looking at the client as a problem rather than the product as a thing to sell, because you've got a relationship there which continues through time. Now, I agree that there have been a lot of problems, but most of them come down to bad money or regulatory failure, because they enable what you're talking about.
It's a serious regulatory failure, but I have no idea how anyone's going to address it other than through pressure groups like us and individuals being screwed and then reporting to their members of parliament. There's nothing more we can do as good as giving the ammunition, the words, the thoughts to victims and getting them to go to their member of parliament, because it's just going to piss them off, going to make them act.
That comes back to, again, the problem with the FCA being the human shield of the parliament. You haven't got a minister that the MP can go to and say, "Oi, your thing that you were dealing with in your ministry has cocked up." They've got this total separation, and they don't have to deal with it. You know, the MP can stand and shout all he likes, but no minister's got any problems.
But if we get enough MPs, it should help.
That particular point, the idea of having a minister responsible for the regulator, is an idea that's come up a few times in our events. And the reason it keeps coming up, I guess, is because all the time the FCA is not somebody's responsibility. It's possible for the FCA to continue to behave the way that it does, to continue to perform the way that it does, without it actually being any particular person's problem if they don't perform well. I'm aware that Mr. Paul Resnick down in Australia would like to share a thought. So Paul, please do take yourself off mute and share your thoughts. Thank you, Paul.
Good day, guys. This is more of an observation. We seem to have a lot of old cranky guys on this project. I'm one of them. I've had the great good fortune to travel the world and contemplate what goes wrong. So I've got a slightly different view from this perspective. I've been interested in financial services just as a business. So the value of a business is really the quality of the recurring income stream. It is how contented your clients are to pay you a fee and view the value they get as is greater than the cost that you're paid. So if we can have clients that you help them articulate their goals and achieve them and pay an appropriate level, there's nobody in the service supply chain that's disadvantaged. That is, the client wins, the advisor wins, the capitalist system wins. There's money in the marketplace to provide capital for businesses to grow and flourish. Regulation wins because there doesn't seem to be any reason for it. So I've got basically what I'm saying is I have a different perspective. I don't think we can change entrenched regulation. I travel the world and I say regulation in most countries is appalling. I would argue the UK regulation is amongst the best in the world. It does more to protect customers than ones in other countries, and you just need to see the nightmare that's Europe or US. So our issue is, how can we as individuals improve things? And my sense is that it's about individual optimism. As well as being a shitster, I call myself a latter-day Marxist. Andy may have heard this before. If you go to Karl Marx's grave in Highgate Cemetery, it basically says on the bottom of it, it's not the role of philosophers to whinge about the world. The role of philosophers is actually to do something about it. So my sense goes like this. It's an individual responsibility. We can't change regulation, can't change politics, can't change entrenched things. It's only how we can behave as individuals. And the insight I share with you is that to be trusted, you have to behave in a trustworthy manner. and it's an individual thing that goes, there is a good way of doing advice, and it's about allowing the markets to meet. So we've got a common ground in the presentation that we've just seen. We just get on with it, is the only argument I can give. The regulation is the minimum standard. It's a wretched standard. It's often conflicted. What we just need to do is to prove at an individual level that we can do better. And I think that's where we align. It's an individual responsibility. Tilting at windmills, regulatory windmills, just is a frustration and ends up giving us labels of being rat bags and not worth spending time with at cocktail parties.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your input there. Thank you. Please do raise your hand, wave your hand. We go Sue Flood, then Philip Meadowcroft. Sue, your point, please do take yourself off mute first, please, Sue. Thank you.
Hi. Very interesting point that we've just got to get on with it. Unfortunately, for pension scam victims that are very late in life, that lose anything from 250k onwards, facing poverty, old age poverty, various different things that they're not going to have in their old age. It's rather difficult to just get on with it and sort of smile, and that's the way the system works. So because these people have diligently saved, and there are unscrupulous con artists that masquerade as IFAs, one would like to see an idealistic world of honest advisors, and that's why we go to advisors in the first place, because we have the misconception they actually are, and they're not. And with no redress for people facing hardship, it's rather difficult to sit and swallow.
Thank you, Sue. So Sue's making the point that if people end up suffering as a consequence of what happens to them, obviously there's a lifetime's worth of harm that can be caused in this way. So this is pretty serious stuff, without a doubt. Thank you, Sue. I'm going to go to Philip Meadowcroft, then we're going to go back to Steve and Garry. Philip, your point, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. Referring to Peter's comment, I think it was, that the FCA doesn't seem to be answerable to anybody, and linking that with Alex Varley-Winter's comment on the chat line a few moments ago, where she's written, the Treasury Committee does some scrutiny of the FCA, so presumably ministers in the Treasury ought to have some responsibility for scrutinising the FCA. Well, she's right in the sense that the FCA reports to the Treasury Select Committee twice a year. Did any of you see the afternoon session today?
I did.
You did.
Yeah.
I hope you kept awake, Andy. And the buffering was not as bad as I suffered. It got me faster from Cornwall to Berkshire than I've ever done in my life, because I was so infuriated with what I heard. I've attended or listened to almost every TSC, FCA or FSA meeting since 2012, and I'm certain it was the worst session I have experienced. The chairman, Mel Stride MP for Mid Devon, is simply out of his depth as chairman of the FCA's boss. Notwithstanding the farcical situation that the TSC has no executive authority whatsoever. Whatever it thinks or says is only advisory, and if you listen to this afternoon's dreadful, weak session with MPs who largely did not understand what the purpose of the FCA was and what its remits were. So we had repeated excuses from the chairman of the CA saying it was out with their remit. And we had in the later parts the repetition of a phrase which I thought had gone from the lexicon, and that was about light touch. gosh, dreams of Hector Sant and his
Hang
light
on.
touch.
There is no such thing as light touch. It's a complete lie. I work in it. I know this. There's no light touch. I have to deal with an 8.5 foot high rule book. That is not light touch.
Yeah, but it's it. If I can come in, firstly, let's pick up the Treasury Select Committee, which at least some of us have been trying to encourage Stride to actually have a review of the whole of financial services and its regulation. He so far has been blocking that personally. He was, of course, an ex-Treasury Minister, which may have something to do with it. So that's one issue. But the other point is that there is simply, for something as big as expensive as this, them turning up and being asked a few questions which they already know what they are because they actually put their own staff on the committee staffing of the FSC, TSC. So they should know what's going on. I mean, why do they second their staff to the Treasury Select Committee? I suspect for that very reason. So it's all a little bit formalised. It's all a bit of a gavotte, and it doesn't actually give any governance or accountability, because in the end, as I think it was Sir Phillips just said, in the end, it's only their advice is only advisory. And indeed, Hector Sant, who was also mentioned in a session a few years ago, in essence, told the committee chairman of the day to go and get stuffed because he couldn't make him do anything. This was on the creation of RDR, which was clearly going to be something that created a number of issues. And what happens? Sant basically tells him to get stuffed. The world takes a couple of spins, and Sant is now running the guidance organisation for the FCA. I mean, you can't make it up. You really can't make it up. It is like there are certain people who believe that they are just beyond reproach. They're beyond criticism, and that's one example. Similarly, when we had the pension transfers the first time around, the company who was one of the major companies in dealing with pension transfers, which was an insurance company, its boss became the chairman of the Securities Investment Board. I mean, again, these things are, it really is. And Steve used the word racket, and I know that will upset one or two people. But in essence, when you see that sort of thing happening, then you realise it is. Similarly, there have been staff from the regulator who have done favours, let us say, for certain businesses, left that regulator and gone to the business they've just done the favour to. There are serious issues. Yeah, so, I mean, as I say, I'm fed up with being on a perpetual Groundhog Day. Today in Parliament, I've only read the thing. I wasn't watching it, but I was doing something else. The regulator, the new chief executive, said that he will get professional indemnity sorted out, and therefore there will be no problem with the FSCS and claims, etc. That is total fantasy, and has been for 22 years. They tried it 22 years ago when we had the original pension transfers. They tried to force the PI market to do things that the PI market was not prepared to do, like settle claims that weren't dealt with on a legal type basis. I say legal type, didn't have to go through court, but the Ombudsman ran on legal evidence and legal general mores. No, that didn't happen. So we now have real problems with the PI insurance. It pollutes the situation as far as the consumer is concerned, who's the most important person. It offers very little cover to the advisor, and with huge payouts over the top. And we then have an ombudsman scheme, which, as I say, is not using any of this. And to be, again, you can't make it up, to be rewarded for something that wasn't very good. They've had the maximum limit that they've had put up to £375,000. Now, if you're a small business and somebody in FOSS most of whom have no qualifications in financial planning at all, can just suddenly decide that you owe somebody £375,000. There aren't a lot of firms that can take that hit. Now, that means you either got to say, okay, all small companies can't be involved anymore. Sorry, you're too, for the system we've invented, you are too small to play, which then means you'll be opened up to the really big players who really know how to screw people properly, banks and insurance companies and similar. Or, well, that's it. You've got to change the system. We've got to have a system which actually takes on evidence properly and looks upon it as if it was a court of law. That way, PI insurers can't have an argument, and we can all go on rejoicing. But that isn't the world we're in. And it allows the bigger players to option out of the system. We did suggest going to a tribunal system, and a lot of people like that. The thing that eventually got in its way was that the banks didn't like it because tribunal system is public. So where's our friend from Andrew? What they were fearful of is things like the RBS scandal. If the tribunal said what, declared on a particular case, then the blame would end up where it needed to, at the bank. Of course, they didn't want that. They want a system which everyone can work behind the back, behind screens. So that's what's happened. So that is our issue. We have an ombudsman scheme which nobody, frankly, trusts. Now, if you're very lucky, you don't get any claims on the ombudsman scheme. Of course, you're quite relaxed about it until it happens to you. I have emails pretty well, certainly at least once a week, from an advisor, and the opening line is always the same. I've never had a claim before, but, and off they go. And you have this scheme where, I had one case where a consumer was told not to do something 7 times by email over about a 2-year period. Do not do it, do not do it, do not do it, do not do it. The client went off and did it without referring to the advisor, and then claimed on the advisor for facilitating his ability to do it.
Wow.
Can I come back, Andy?
Yeah, please do. Let's come open.
Having inflamed Stephen and Gary, and very interesting remarks they make indeed. I think that can I go from the specifics that Gary's been going on to the generality? We have created the FCA, or its predecessor, the FSA, as an independent authority, and government is frightened to intervene because if the regulator reports to an authority which is governmental in some way, it somehow threatens its independence because it will be under the aegis of that governmental authority. So that is the difficulty we have. We've created a regulator which is able to decide what it investigates, and if being told to investigate something by the Treasury Select Committee and decides that it doesn't want to pursue it, it can just bury it. It doesn't even have to tell us. We don't have to have an update system. It is not even, there's no case management system like you have in the High Court. And that's why we have a situation with the HBOS inquiry into the conduct of the directors in 2008, which is 4.5 years since it was invited to consider, and has still not reported. And we cannot tell or get from the FCA whether they've kicked it down the road, the long grass, forgotten about it, or it's just too damned hot to handle. Because they, as an investigatory authority, a regulatory authority, they are not required to indicate where they are on anything. And that is a fundamental flaw. And when an investigation is commenced, surely there should be some consideration like, you must come back within 6 months and tell us where you are and apply for a 6 months further investigation. Some things do take longer, I accept. But unless we have some kind of control on executive control and the Treasury Select Committee, or whatever it's called, and I hope it's not the Treasury Select Committee, given their abject performance this afternoon, then we are not going to get very far at all with this. But that is where we've got to start, and having it on a quasi-legal basis, case management, and that they've got to perform and not be subject, that once they've then got their conclusions in place, they go through to maximalization. And those who are whose collars are being fingered run to their learned bewigged friends and delay things for another 6 months while they try to rewrite the conclusions. This is balmy. So I've gone from the specifics that Garry has rightly pointed out about PI and so forth to the more general aspects of the way we have constructed financial regulation in the UK, and it doesn't make any sense. It's just absurd. It's straight out of Gilbert and Sullivan. Yes, Minister stuff.
Tell me about it.
Well, shut up now.
No, Philip, you're saying something very intelligent, and I'll give you another example. The Connaught scandal.
Oh God.
135 million quid worth. Steve teed me up on this earlier. And it's my favourite subject simply because it is such a clear example. They were told that it was a fraud, the they being the FSA, but avoid this. Oh, we're a Security Investment Board, we're the FCA, we're the FCA, and it's all different. No, it isn't. It's the same limited company in each case. They are the same business, just a rename. So says he who's just renamed his anyway. But the point I was going to make is 9 years have passed since it became very clear that a fraud was going on, conducted by British citizens, and not one of them in those 9 years has ever had an interview with the police. Zero, nothing. Why? Because the regulator refuses to hand the case over to the police until it's done all its stuff, and that includes now a review which we're expecting at any time soon. We don't know when it's coming out because they refuse to tell us, but I suspect it'll be on a day which is going to be very good for burying bad information. We thought actually it might be today, but we didn't know about the TCF at the time because we thought that the American election might be a good time for them to do it, but they haven't yet. So there you are, 9 years. By the time these people will eventually have their collar felt, they'll claim they're too old to go to prison.
Thank you. I know Steve wants to come in here. We'll get to Steve in just a second. Gary, is it your view that there isn't anything sufficiently robust in place to actually, frankly, regulate the regulator? Is the part of the problem there's simply nobody with the governance responsibility of managing the governance of the industry?
Yeah, there's a wonderful Latin phrase which escapes me, but basically it is who regulates the regulator. And that is the problem. It should be the government department, which would turn out generally to be the Treasury, although it was the DTI at one point in my life, but it would be that. But to say, we're all independent, and then have nothing really. I mean, we would do a huge amount of work trying to get things brought up at the Treasury Select Committee. Well, the Treasury Select Committee got 1,000 other things it's doing too. It's not just the Regulatory Committee by any means. I mean, we're really after the Lord Mayor's show. And, you know, they're going to go and have a thing about the economic issues of COVID. Oh, well, that's nice and popular and modern, isn't it? So, you know, we're going to be pushed off the scene again for that. So it is extremely difficult. The problem is that the Treasury wants influence, but they don't want responsibility. They have influence over the regulator. They lie when they say they haven't, but they don't want to take responsibility for when they interfere with something. They don't want to take responsibility for what they interfere with. Anyway, there you go.
Thank you, Gary. Let's go to Steve. Steve, please continue.
Yes, Philip, I completely understand what you're saying, but it's a function of it. When you set up the whole regulatory system is an abandonment of responsibility. It is deliberately set up to provide a second layer of government which isn't accountable at all. It's a technocratic way of running an economy. It's favoured by people who have that mindset that if only we all did what they said, everything would be absolutely hunky-dory. But of course, that's always failed everywhere it's been tried. So it's established as a totally unaccountable system. That's how it's set up. And it's also a bureaucratic system. Now, for bureaucracies to work, you set rules for bureaucracies. You don't let them write them, their own ones. Otherwise, you get the mess you got now. The police is a bureaucracy, but it works to rules that are set for it. The regulator has no rules set for it. Three stupid, ridiculous, wishy-washy little things it's supposed to do, which don't make any sense anyway. And it then writes its own rule book. So it's setting its own rule for its own behaviour. And consequently, as the meat and drink to a bureaucrat is more rules, if you've ever read Parkinson's Law, you get the chaos we've got now. And on top of that, when it's unaccountable as it is, and it's working on bad money, it becomes a racket, a self-serving racket. And I work on the principle these days that there are two sorts of organisations in the world, rackets and non-rackets. It's very easy to keep it going, you know, that way you can get yourself properly organised, you understand, you don't get confused. And the FCA is definitely a racket, a self-serving racket. And that's because of Gary's point about being unaccountable. Unless you bring it directly into some form of supervision by a minister in a government department who is going to get pasted by constituent MPs every single day, and then he realises he can't do what he's saying to do, what he's trying to do, you'll never get it sorted, ever.
Thank you, Steve. We'll go to further comments and questions. Please do wave your hand, wave at me if you want to say something. Mr. Steve Connolly, lovely to have your input, sir. Please go for it, Steve. Thank you.
Okay, well, I did have a client I was acting on behalf of who lost £1 million in Connaught Series 1. It also, his advisor had put another $1 million in a copycat called Bluegate Capital, and has spread another £1 million around 3 other unregulated collectives. Anyway, we now, thanks to the Capita, obviously involvement, we managed to get virtually the £3 million back, but it has taken 9 years to get there. So we have a lot of experience. That sort of got to be interested in helping people recover money that have been stolen. And I don't think it's incompetency of the Financial Conduct Authority. I think it's deliberate incompetence. Because, and similarly with the police and Serious Fraud Office is seriously underfunded deliberately because parliamentarians are supporting the financial institutions of the capital of London. It's an international capital. They don't want to embarrass the city. And that is why a lot of what we see is happening because there is no mechanisms put in place to help people recover assets. So the amount of assets that are ever recovered as a result of scams in the United Kingdom is 20 pence in every £100. So that's 0.2% is ever actually recovered. That's because of the lack of mechanisms for people to raise complaints. You can't complain to the Financial Conduct Authority. They do absolutely nothing. You can't complain to the police. They'll just tell you to refer it to the Serious Fraud Office. You can't complain to the Serious Fraud Office because it'll just end up in a bin. There's absolutely nothing happening in from governmental support to help victims of scammers. And that's why it's been down to the private, and I'm glad to see a few people on here who make it their job to help people recover. I know it's a thankless task because these scammers have millions and millions of pounds of money and we have nothing in defence, and it's very difficult to recover money from a scammer when they're paying lawyers with the millions of pounds that they've scammed from people when we got absolutely nothing to counter that. So you know, I don't think it's incompetence. I don't think it's witless economically. I think it's deliberate.
Yeah.
And you know, so I wonder what the people on here today have to say about that. But that's my view.
Steve, I always love listening to Steve talk because for those of you who know Steve, you'll be aware that he's at the very opposite end of the kind of financial planning market to dodgy folk. Steve's very much into, if you like, life planning and truly planning the client's needs and all those sorts of very advanced ways of looking at the issues. And you must, I imagine quite literally, Steve, sometimes put your head in your hands when you hear about what's been going on and how people are being ripped apart by crooks. And obviously there's a big difference, I'm making this point for obvious reasons, there's a big difference between a true, legit, authentic financial planner and a criminal. There's a huge difference. In fact, I joined financial planning on August the 18th, 1986, back in the Loutro days, the Wild West, and I'm absolutely convinced that the single most positive thing that can happen to somebody as far as their finances are concerned is to be looked after by a legitimate, qualified, authorized, competent advisor who cares about them, who works as some kind of proper, authentic fiduciary duty. It's much more significant than anything else. You know, if you've got the right kind of person looking after you, that's it. You're home and dry. You know, whatever can be done for you will be done. And Steve's articulation of what his firm does is basically true to the basic principles of figuring out where the client is, figuring out where the client ought to go to, working out a plan to get them there, making sure that suitable advice is given and suitable products are selected, and off you go. So there's a massive value in a good advisor, but somehow we have a regulatory framework that allows for good advisors with clean records who are proud of the authentic way in which they put the client's interests first, who've been very good at adapting to a fee-based model, etc., having to pay horrific amounts of money through FSCS levies, etc., because they're in effect paying for the sins of others. And there's got to be a better way of doing it than this. Let me just throw open to any other comments before we go to a quick comfort break. Sue Flood's got a hand up. Sue, please do share your further thoughts. Thank you very much. You're on mute, Sue. every time.
I do apologise. Steve, I absolutely 100% agree with you, and I would add to that the HMRC and the government trustees, because they're also scammers, and I'll go as far as that on this shout here. Inevitably, the victims end up paying through taxes, so it's a beneficial system, and the poor, decent IFAs end up paying through their levies, so it's a win-win all round.
So the question I've got to ask then for Garry and Steve, and this is a bit of a contentious question, but let's go for it. Why on earth haven't the trade bodies and professional associations for the financial planning industry, why on earth haven't they over the years sorted all these issues out? Why is it that the financial planners always seem to be on the back foot, underrepresented, underprotected? What's been going wrong there, do you think?
Garry.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
I think at one point we did have a reasonable stick at it, but that's many years ago. The problem is now that as soon as the new Act came in, the 2000 Act, it's not that new now, and the regulator was allowed to do anything it liked, basically because it was independent. That meant that you couldn't go to your MP, and it was designed that way. Let's not muck about, because I was using MPs before that Act came out in a most outrageous manner to sort out the issues that we found ourselves in, and actually used a thing called democracy. God knows where that went. But yeah, we were able to do it. Well, when they did the new Act, and by then they had attacked my association and effectively taken us out of the game, they were able to pass an act which said, no, these people are independent. Nobody can possibly criticise them. MPs can't be involved. The Treasury isn't involved, although it is, etc., etc. So we have had our attempt. The problem is most IFAs now, and Jill Carney had a go as well, and I've wasted 5 years of my time recently trying to do something. A lot of IFAs are actually frightened of the regulator, that's for sure. Some of them are, and it's almost like a sort of Stockholm syndrome thing going on. And the others actually quite like not paying money. What I should have done when I started the trade association 5 years ago was call it apathy and not charge any fees. It would have been extremely popular. That, I'm afraid, sir, is the nature of the beast, and I think people have just got gun tired now, and you know, Jill had a go, I've had a go, and there are others who are involved but are not really having a go. And in the end, well, what do you do if you can't get the Treasury Select Committee to review it properly, despite this becoming a multi-billion-pound industry now? And the MPs quite like this fairy godmother that gets hold of problems and just takes them away. We are stuck in the situation. I mean, we do a lot of Jill, as Gary says. Oh, right. Yeah, so there we be. But it's a pity. Wish we could do more, but you know, a lot of advisors are waiting for some sort of Jesus character to come down from the mountain and sort of lead them on. Ain't gonna happen. And if they did, they would claim that he was too religious.
Yeah, you have to be a bit masochistic to do this job, I think, really now. I belong to a study group with 4 or 5 like-minded companies like mine, all fee charging, all consultancy based. And they don't get involved in Gary's trade association. They don't see any need to. They all are running money for high net worth people. They're all very well sorted out. They do probably, you know, they really do thorough financial planning jobs, as we do. But they see their membership of their professional body, which was the old the financial planning, or what it's called now, CISI now, CISI, as all they need to do to have a representation. But as Gary will tell you, CISI and those other ones aren't really at all clued, or rather they're suffering sort of regulatory capture. They don't see any mileage in challenging what is an inherently corrupt system. Well, somebody put in here just now, crony capitalism, which is what we've got now. It is crony capitalism. And why, if you're making a living now and you're not suffering, why would you want to put head above the parapet, which is what Gary and I have done. I'm a director of his association. So why would you want to do that? You can sit back and make, you know, £100,000 a year pay, doing a good job for your clients, retire at 55, 60, and not have that issue. Why would you want to stick your head up when you cannot anyway have any effect at all on an utterly accountable, and I keep on saying, a regulatory system, and that you can't do it, and it's designed like that. You may not want to hear this, but it's a cultural Marxism. But Blair's regime wrecked so much of what we would consider to be a free society and our heritage of our way we run our country, that you've now got a situation where you've got to unwind all that. Now that's going to take this conversation on from the immediate problem of what we're talking about here into a much deeper area. But I do read a lot about this stuff and I do study it, and it really we're on that game. We are in an end game of liberty unless we do something about this. And it comes back to, every single time, it comes back to accountability and sound money. And we have neither. You know, you can't call what we have now, which is called financial repression, anything a free society. You can't. It's a criminal conspiracy by the you know the global elites. We're in a desperate state.
I'm going to invite Andrew Candy to elaborate on a point he just put into the chat, which I think is a very, very good point. Andrew, would you mind please unmuting and elaborating on your point? Because I agree with you. I think the relationship between the regulator and the banks is very, very different to the relationship between the regulator and the IFAs. So what would you say was the difference, Andrew, and why do you think it is different?
Couldn't really make a comparison because I don't know about any of the side of it from IFAs, but in terms of from the bank side, effectively with the interest rate swaps, you could pretty much say that no action has been taken against the banks whatsoever by comparison to what they inflicted on SMEs, which was the enforced purchase of interest rate swaps through, I think the original scheme calculated 32,000 SMEs had been sold 38,000 swaps without any disclosure about margin credit facilities or anything about the product itself. And a further 60,000 SMEs were sold tailored business loans where they had an underlying interest rate swap derivative trade, but were not told about it and not told about the liabilities. I can't imagine any IFA being allowed to do that, and yet the banks have been allowed to do it en masse. and you're talking potentially about redress that would be in the region of 30 to 50 billion conservatively, if it was to be resolved. So it seems to dwarf anything as far as, you know, Connor or LCF are concerned. So they seem to go for low-hanging fruit of IFAs. They'll tackle them quite happily, but the banks can literally get away with, you know, mass murder by comparison. So there seems to be a complete lack of continuity between how they handle banks and how they handle IFAs.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm inclined to agree with everything that you've just said. I think that a big part of this problem must be the very cosy relationship between the banking sector and the Treasury. You could even argue that the FCA is fundamentally conflicted, because on one hand, it's supposed to be protecting the consumer from harm. They have a statutory duty to try to do that. On the other hand, they clearly are influenced by the Treasury, as Garry quite rightly said earlier. And if the Treasury see part of its function as keeping the City of London buoyant and bubbly and all the banks and bankers happy, then we're never going to have a system that's going to be fair to the consumer. And if it's not fair to the consumer won't be treated properly, won't trust it, and we end up in this downward spiral, this vortex that takes us to where we are now. It really is quite frustrating. I remember Paul Resnick at an event we ran for our Australian community a few months ago. I remember Paul Resnick at the end of the session talking very bluntly about how, I don't want to put the wrong words in Paul's mouth, but basically he was saying that he's becoming increasingly skeptical about whether we can really do anything to change the system and make it work. And I can absolutely identify with that, because the odds are stacked pretty much against us. The good guys don't have any power or money, and the bad guys, I know I'm simplifying things here, have got all the power, all the contacts, all the influence, and all the cards stacked in their favor. I just hope that somehow we collectively, and I'm not just talking about TTF, I'm talking about society as a whole, somehow collectively we can find a way to kind of get organized and kind of fight back, you know. I've been listening to a lot of stuff on YouTube, and there's some great people talking about how the fundamental authenticity of our democratic system is really under attack here. And I'm not going to go into politics; it would be totally wrong to do so. But if we had a democracy where the voice of the ordinary person was properly being listened to, if we had a democracy where governments on the right weren't put into power by support by banks, etc., or governments on the left weren't put into power by support from unions, etc., and we were simply more focused on what's right for the ordinary folk, we'd have a much stronger, much better situation than we have now. We're going to go to final comments and questions from Steve, and then we're going to have a break, and then we'll reconvene. So Stephen, yeah, go for it, Steve. Thank you.
Andy, you need to read Hayek's pretensive knowledge speech at the Nobels, because what he talks about is exactly that. What he talks about is a party of liberty. What you don't want, what we don't have, if you want to get political about this, is a party of liberty. Both parties are essentially rent-seeking. Now, if you think you can start a political movement which promotes a party of liberty, you're probably only going to get support from about 10% of the population. Oddballs like me, you know, libertarian oddballs like me. But that's the situation you're talking about. Politics is a game of favours and influence and backhanders and stuff, which is why you have a small government. If you get all governments fail all the time, they all fail. You probably don't trust the Tories. I don't trust the Labour. I don't trust the Tories either, as it happens. So the only way to do it, if you get big government, of course, it fails bigly. So the only way you could do it is have absolutely minuscule governments. Then they can't cock it up.
Okay, thanks, Steve. We're going to go to a break. So it's 26 minutes past the hour. Can we please reconvene at 25:02? So we've got roughly 9-10 minutes. We'll reconvene and we'll go from there. But in the meantime, I'm going to put us all onto gallery view. Can we please show our appreciation to Garry and Stephen for bravely sharing their views in such a forthright way? Whether we agree or not, it's been a great catalyst for discussion and debate. So thanks very much, guys. Thank you. Okay, wonderful. So we've got a coffee break, as it were, or a bottle of scotch or whatever takes your fancy. Back at 25 to the hour, please. We've got 8 minutes. Thanks, guys and girls. Thank you very much. Okay, time to reconvene. I've got a lovely glass of a cinnamon flavoured whiskey, so it's late enough in the evening, I think, to do that. I feel nice and relaxed. I hope you all are as well. I'm going to share something with you. It's become quite clear to us within the TTF that to really make change, we need to get politicians in some way engaged with our work and in some way involved in trying to make things happen. Because one thing does seem to be sure, the regulators do pay attention to what the politicians think of them. So with that in mind, we've been working very hard, and I do mean very hard, to do various things. And the Transparency Task Force now finds itself the secretariat for two important all-party parliamentary groups. So the first one is the all-party parliamentary group on pension scams. I'm going to quickly share with you this screen. So we've created this. This is a Transparency Task Force initiative. We have lots of members in our Secretariat Committee, including various folk on this Zoom meeting. Please do step forward if you wish to help this initiative. Please do step forward to become part of the Secretariat Committee, because the Secretariat Committee's got a lot of work to do in helping to make this a successful all-party parliamentary group. I'm pretty confident we can do that. We're working very, very well as a group of people, basically trying to do all we can to help shine a bright light on the change that's necessary. Here's our Steve Conley. Here's our Jean. Sue Flood, we passed to earlier on. We're doing all we possibly can to really focus the mind in relation to the changes that are necessary in relation to this matter. Here's Sarah, who's with us as well today. So great that everybody's involved in terms of the Secretariat. And as well, of course, we need politicians too. We've worked so hard. I'm being immodest here, but we really have worked so hard to recruit politicians. It's like herding cats. It's the most difficult thing to do in the world, but we've managed to do it. So we've got these politicians and these. In fact, Stephen Timms is the chair of the Work and Pension Select Committee, so it's particularly cool that we've got him on our all-party parliamentary group, on the all-party parliamentary group for pension scams. And there's more. And there's more. Jack Dromey is important. Jack's the Shadow Pensions Minister, so it's really, really good that we've got Jack involved as well. And there's more, etc., etc. So without a doubt, if we get all-party parliamentary groups up and running, then it creates an opportunity to create influence, and that's what we're trying to do. Those of you who know TTF pretty well will know that we have a strategy for driving change, which is all about bringing together the thinking of those who have a sense of passion and purpose for the change that we want to see, with those who have the power and the position to make change possible. And in our country, in the UK, it is the politicians who have the power and the position to make change possible. So that's why we're doing what we do. And that's why we've also helped to set up another all-party parliamentary group called Personal Banking and Fairer Financial Services, which will cover things outside of the pension scam space. So once again, if that may be of interest to you to get involved with, please do get involved by volunteering to be part of the Secretariat. Okay, I'll put a note in the chat. Please do reply to my note in the chat if you do want to become involved with either of those two APPGs. And huge thanks to everybody who is already involved, in particular to Sue Flood. If it wasn't for Sue Flood, I, as an individual, will not have been as motivated as I have been for the last 3 years or so in trying to do what I can do in terms of pension scams. So big hats off to Sue Flood for that. Thank you, Sue. Thank you very, very much. Okay, I want to talk about a particular topic. There's a senator in the USA, Senator Elizabeth Warren, who I rate very, very highly, by the way. She talks about the revolving door problem, i.e. people who work for the regulators who then go and work in industry. So that one minute they're regulating and then they're working for firms that they were literally previously regulating. And of course, how people who were at regulated firms then go and work for regulators. I'd like to get your thoughts, please, about whether this is a problem. I'm absolutely convinced it is, but more importantly, what can actually be done about it? Is there some way of having some kind of conditionality in people's contracts that they can't, for example, work for the FCA and then immediately afterwards go and work for a firm that the FCA has been regulating? Is there something that could and should be done? Because we could maybe write a discussion paper about it or a white paper. We can try and get some noise. We can try to identify where we believe this may have been a problem in the past. So please do wave at me if you'd like to say something about this particular matter. Please go for it. Thank you. Mr. Philip Meadowcroft, then we'll go to Garry Heath. Philip, over to you, sir. Please do unmute. Thank you. So first of all, Philip, is it a problem? And if it is, what can be done about it?
I think it is a problem. And it's not just FCA, what was the route the route you're going? FCA to the regulated companies, yes?
Well, either way, one to the other, they're both problematic, aren't they?
It must be both ways. I mean, we've seen the silly sight of Hector Sands going to Barclays, albeit for a short while before they found that he wasn't very helpful, and Tracy McDermott going to Standard Chartered, and still there as far as I can tell. It is not valuable, but the problem that in the FCA are the rates of pay for staff are a small fraction of what they can earn in the private sector. And the private sector regulators, regulatees, are very happy to pick up people from the FCA for the obvious reasons that they know what they're looking at. And I think it's going to be difficult to restrain people from moving from one side to the other. And it may be that, in fact, it's all one side, and that the Treasury in the city is really one simple institution, single institution, because the Treasury, as Rishak, the Chancellor, is now finding, needs to go to the city every week to borrow money to finance his expenditures. And the city will cough up, provided that the Treasury and Whitehall go easy on them. That is why we don't have regulation of an effective nature in this country. And whether it's people traveling from the FCA into the banks or the insurance companies or vice versa, I think is fairly immaterial, because our system relies on the financing of government by the City of London. And therefore the city is not going to take be held prisoner to any kind of silly regulations, or else it just walks away from the debt management meetings that every Wednesday, I think they are, when they buy another 90 billion pounds of government stock. And where will we be then? I think that is the fundamental problem.
Crikey. That's really interesting, Peter. Phil, I've never thought about that. Thank you very much for sharing your views. I think Garry Heath wanted to have a word, then we'll go to Steve Farrell, then anyone else.
Yeah,
Garry,
there's another point which is, I mean, even if that wasn't the case, which I fully accept Philip it is, there is another sport, which is that the amount of money that the banks, I gave Andy this a previous meeting, the banks spend on lobbying in Europe, and that includes in these figures the UK, because we were still there at the time, 300 million euros a year in lobbying governments and the EU. 300 million. The advisor community would be hard pressed to find 3. So we're being solidly outgunned too. And that is, to a certain extent, the nature of having a very small number of companies. It's much easier to run a trade association for 6 firms, which is basically what the banking trade association does, than it is to deal with you know, thousands, which I potentially have. So that is it. We are being solidly outgunned, notwithstanding the system. And is it interesting? You know, the vast majority of claims that go through FOSS, they don't go through the FSCS because the banks can't fail. Effectively, the taxpayer pays for banking failure, because the taxpayer, for the most part, is the shareholder. The FOSS, 90-something% of its successful claims were banks. And yet it's only the banks that are allowed to be in the top places in regulation. Hello? Isn't that interesting? Why is it necessary to have either bank people or people who work for banks in second hand, like the current chairman, who is actually a solicitor for major companies? Why are they the ones who make the decisions? And you may, of course, Philip may have hit the reason on the head, but it's not the only one.
Thank you very much indeed, Gary. Steve Farrell. You're on mute, Steve.
Yeah, I was going to agree with Philip, really. I mean, it is absolutely a racket. I mean, and to build on what Gary says, we don't have 6 banks in the UK. We've got one bank, the Bank of England, and 6 subsidiaries. It's one bank. It's absolutely straight out of here, which is the Marxist Manifesto. Number 5, centralisation of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and exclusive monopoly. That's what we've got. You've got a Marxist structure. It's guaranteed to go wrong. And you know, you're dealing here with fundamentals about what makes a free society. You know, if you don't control money, if you don't have sound money, you don't have property rights. End of story. How do you carry out an exchange economy and specialisation? This, you can be sure that the money you get paid for labour you put in is sound. Where's your property rights? You haven't got any. And the current situation we have with government debt and the way they do it, and I know this is what MMTers think, but they're just nut jobs. It's just guaranteed to end up as a disaster. You know, people, we're all talking about stuff here, and we're not tackling the fundamental problems. Andy's initiative with transparency is great, but it's starting halfway up the argument. You're not at the fundamentals here, which has been nailed and outlined by Philip. You've got to go back to sound money and start from there, sort out the banking system, and a lot of the other problems will start to fall away.
Thank you very much indeed, Steve. Thank you. And I completely understand your point about we need to start at the fundamentals. Would anybody else like to share anything on this particular matter, or indeed anything else? Alex Varley-Winter. Thank you, Alex.
Only recently started covering financial regulation. So I can't draw much lessons from that, but I can tell you about a couple of recent stories I've done that have given me a couple of ideas. So one is about sort of shareholder activism and how that has been working recently and how effective that has been. And often what that focuses on is trying to get, say, if there's disparities between the top and the bottom of a company, trying to get worker representation on boards, or trying to get shareholders treated more evenly, or you know, those kinds of motions can sometimes have an impact. But in a similar way with regulation, could there be some kind of standard model of any regulator to have sort of victims of misconduct actually in a position of authority with a formal representative within, or representatives within the organisation? That might be one way of looking at it. Another way, this is drawing on what I've heard about the SRA and the policing regulator. It's a lot of the problems are so similar. You know, like there's one story I'm working on where a police officer burned clothes from a crime scene during a homicide investigation. So it was, you know, destruction of evidence. You would expect the regulator to act quickly. In fact, you know, they didn't open an investigation for 4 years. They took 4 years to investigate, and they didn't once interview him. Shouldn't there be a standard across all regulators in the UK that if you are investigating something, you have to interview the people you're investigating? You can't just do it all on paper, or, you know, shuffle things around like that. Shouldn't there be some common standards? And this isn't a problem just with the financial regulator. It's definitely something that you see as a common theme as an investigative journalist looking at different stories. You see constantly these kind of problems with watchdogs crop up. But yeah, I do feel like if there was some rules on process and procedure that might make some headway and also if there was some structural changes where victims had more representation within the body.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's just some thoughts.
Thank you very much indeed. Some very, very good thoughts there. Thank you, Alex. I'm going to invite Shan Turnbull and then Paul Resnick, if Paul's still with us, to comment, because Shan and Paul, being Australians, have been living through the Hayne Commission recently. Shan, could you just very, very briefly, for those that don't know, tell everybody a little bit about the Hayne Commission, what it's kind of found, and what you think needs to happen to sort out the regulatory framework in the UK. I know you know the regulatory framework in the UK very well. Shan, so please introduce yourself and share your thoughts. Thank you, Shan. While Shan is sorting out his volume, I'm going to invite Paul Resnick to speak. So Paul, thank you. Just tell everybody a bit about the Hayne Commission, what it's found, and what your thoughts are about what needs to happen to fix the regulatory framework. Thank you.
Hi guys. Hayne Commission, sorry, the Hayne, sorry Shane, the Hayne Royal Commission essentially found the banks and AMP, our largest financial planning business in Australia, were charging ongoing fees even for dead people. So the one organisation in the planet that should be able to recognise when somebody dies, the life insurance company, was still charging ongoing fees. So the fundamental issue was that the core of financial planning, ongoing advice for a fee, was not occurring. And it was, I guess, the largest stone in the pond of embarrassment. It triggered all of the banks to get out of wealth management in every way imaginable. They sold their asset management businesses, their platforms, their life insurance companies, their advice businesses, essentially on the basis that the embarrassment didn't compensate, or there wasn't sufficient compensation for in profit. So all of the notion of cross-selling, upselling, protecting clients that had permeated the Australian marketplace for the last 20 years was stood on its head. So for those of you in the UK, you will remember similar sorts of things happening in the UK. The banks got out of financial advice with the announcement of RDR almost instantly, and then somehow or other just keep hanging in there. So in Oz, we're now left with chaos, I guess. At the same time as Hayne, there was an understanding that people were underqualified, so new higher standards of education were required. And as we know, many advisors are as old as me, and the thought of doing a 3 or 4 year degree. So there was a massive reduction of advisors. People simply said, it's too expensive, too difficult. I'm no longer interested. So we're in our own little mess at the moment. There's some discussion that people should move into coaching. Coaching is an unlicensed activity. You can teach people good behavior. You don't need to sell product. Remember, most regulation is around product selling, not on professional advice. And professional advice, as we know, is buy diversified index funds and just hang in there. Is probably the 2 single most useful pieces of knowledge anybody can run with. It manages fees, diversification, and sequence risk, all in 2 instructions. So Oz, we're working our way through. The banks here, I describe them as their ATMs of the government. I think very consistent with the language that you guys have been saying for the last while. They're too pivotal for there to be anything to upset them, because it's how we distribute and hold the economy together. The lowering interest rates and the other things of QE simply provide the banks with more working capital to lend money for property, which keeps votes up. Yes. So I'm not quite as cynical as some of the things I've heard from you guys, but it's not far different. So Oz is it runs along. I don't have any answer. I'm not a libertarian. I guess I call myself a Marxist. This notion that roles of individuals are to do things. And I think everybody on this call, I would like to say, brothers and sisters, we are all Marxists. We're trying to improve the system.
That's not true.
No. Oh, I know you won't. You can shake your head. But we're trying to improve the system. I've got very simple. I'm just using what's on Marx's headstone. We're trying to improve the system, and that's a great thing to do. It's very hard to tilt at the windmills that are institutions and government. And I go back to what I said before. I've almost given up. I've been pushing good advice all of my professional life because I think everybody wins, as I tried to say earlier. Everybody wins if we behave well, and that's what we need to do. Nobody really cares. We have a term in Oz, it's called a flying fuck. Nobody in regulatory process or banking or government seems to pay any attention. They're lobbied out of the way by things. So all we can do is fight individually and noisily for what's good. So I'm still fairly optimistic that we can change things by individual action, but it may be the final call of an old codger in his last short while.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you. I always love listening to you share your thoughts. Thank you. We're going to go to from Paul Resnick.
Can you hear me now? And can you hear me now, Andy?
We can hear you, and I can see that you've taken the trouble to go outside so you can speak freely without waking up. Without waking up Pauline. Jan, please do share us your thoughts. Hopefully, you can tell us what needs to happen to fix all this. I've got a feeling you know the answer, Jan.
Well, I'd like to make two basic suggestions. One, I agree with the discussion about central banking. It's about a form of central planning. We know that doesn't work. And the way to get decentralized banking is to have a standard unit of value. Then you don't need any central banks, and the private sector can enter into create credit and manage credit and control it on a highly decentralized democratic basis. So the Bank of England, I made a submission to the Bank of England early this year saying they shouldn't be worried about creating a digital currency. Their remit is to have a stable currency, and you can't have a stable currency when it's not tethered to the reality. And I've written a number of articles of how we could get sustainable money, and you've got to relate it to the real world. And the Internet of Things can automatically calculate a sustainability index, which should change very slowly according to how well we're relying on renewable circular economy. But that's one topic. The other topic is what to do about bank regulation. And there's a science of regulation that's called system science. And system science, there's the natural laws of system science. All living things are self-regulating and self-governing because they obey the laws of system science. And system science is if you've got complex systems, you need to have matching complexity. And the only way you can get matching complexity is the stakeholders. You need to have bottom-up regulation by stakeholder associations. Now, what is missing? What the Hayne Commission said, there's a tremendous asymmetry of power and data between the customers, the stakeholders, and the banks. And it made no recommendation to correct that. Now, my role model for correcting that is what Ralph Nader did in the United States when all the big, powerful electricity, communication, water, and gas utilities captured the regulators. And that's what the banks have done around the world, because there's no business school or school of government in the world that teaches bottom-up regulation. Everything is assumed to be top-down. Part of it's because of monotheistic religions believe that's the way the natural order of things. But if you go into nature, you have distributed regulation from the bottom up. In our bodies, we have all self-regulating functions. And what Ralph Nader did, he got the customers to volunteer to donate money to hire highly trained experts to make submissions to to stop the regulatory capture of the big utilities. They're called citizen utility boards, or CUBs, because they're bear watching. And what we need is stakeholder association. So no giant corporation or financial service organization should be allowed to exist unless it funds independently stakeholder associations. Now, the role of the regulator would simply be determining the qualifications and the pay of these co-regulators. It's called supplementary regulations from the bottom up. And I've been a director of the Australian Shareholders Association for 12 years, and we need many more associations like that, but specifically for each a giant organization, not just the customers, but the workers, because they've got to talk to each other and share the information to reduce the asymmetry of information and power. You've got to go back to the power structure of society. And we've got to, at the moment, we've got pyramids of power, top down. And what we've got to do is also have bottom up, and we've got to create those institutions. It's no use just being a better person or changing the culture. The culture will change when you change the power structure. And the whole system of power through the capitalist world is one-sided and anti-democratic, and by creating these citizen associations and stakeholders associations, you enrich democracy. At the moment, democracy is being hollowed out. And there's the whole discussion you've had today is how democracy gets hollowed out by the cozy relationship between the MPs and the regulators. So we've got to. I see that your task is to initiate, catalyze, and light fire multiple stakeholder associations to be co-regulators and make the regulators accountable to the people they're supposed to be protecting. Then instead of being accountable to Parliament, they should be co-accountable, and the key performance indicators of the regulators should be determined by the customer associations. Now, with the internet nowadays, it's very easy to do this. You get a lot of Airbnb and hail services where the quality of the service is automatically assessed and reported on the internet, and we should have the same thing on the internet, where there should be a disclosure of all the screw ups and all the exploitation and the abuse on the internet, so the stakeholder advocates can fire the regulators if they're not getting paid enough or getting highly enough qualified people to counter the power of the big institutions. I think that's enough for the moment, Andy.
Shan, thank you so much. You've put a lifetime's work into a few minutes, and I appreciate you doing that. Ladies and gentlemen, it's just gone 8 o'clock in UK, so we're at the point where we're going to formally close the session. However, we will keep the channel open for as long as people want it, up to 8:30, so another 25 minutes or so. I want to bring everyone's attention to the fact that we've had a very forthright conversation. We've had the chance to speak to and listen to Garry, Heath and Stephen Farrall. We want to thank them very much indeed. We also want to thank everybody that's taken trouble to be part of today's conversation. In particular, I must mention Shan in Australia and Paul in Australia, who've got up well before breakfast time to be part of the conversation today. So what I'd like us to do, please, is invite everybody to show appreciation for everyone's input today. Wave your hands, behave like you're 6, shake your head about like you were when you were a little one, nice and innocent as it were. And thank you all very much indeed.